You're watching Word-Wise Living. On this episode, we're asking the question, what does it mean to be in Christ? The Bible uses different words to describe someone who follows Jesus. Saved, a Christian, born again, a disciple. But the most often used, and I think the best description, is the phrase, in Christ. To be in Christ means that you've responded to God's grace through faith in Jesus Christ, his perfect life and sacrificial death, as your only means of forgiveness, salvation, and a right standing before God. This means that God has made you alive when you were spiritually dead, and you are now brought near when you were once far off. You are no longer God's enemies, but you are adopted into God's family. To be in Christ is a declaration of your status as being saved, but it's also a description of your new identity. In my previous video, I talked about identity and how we get that primarily by being created by God for His glory. Well, today I want to build off of that and look at another way that we find our identity, and that is by being in Christ. Our status and condition of being in Christ fundamentally transforms our identity. Colossians 1:12 through 14 provides 5 truths about those who are in Christ. It says, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of His beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. Now, in this section, we see 5 new identities that are true of those who are in Christ. The first one is this: you are qualified. Left to ourselves, we don't measure up. We don't have enough. We aren't enough. Left to ourselves, we miss the mark. We do not possess the righteousness required to stand before God. We are unqualified. But because of the perfect righteous record applied to our account by grace through faith, we are qualified. We are given what we do not possess and could not earn. We are qualified to stand before God. And this qualification brings with it the next truth of our identity in Christ. The second one is this, that we share in the inheritance. Left to ourselves and without Christ, we are excluded from the promises of God, and we are without hope and without God in the world, according to Ephesians 2:12. But in Christ, we share in the inheritance because we have been adopted into God's family. Galatians 4:4 and 5 and verse 7 elaborate on this point. God sent His Son to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. So you are no longer a slave, but God's child. And since you are His child, God has also made you an heir. It doesn't matter what your past was. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what you look like or who your family is or what people say about you. If God says that you are now in His family, then you belong. You are accepted. You are a child of His in Christ. In addition to that, number 3, you are delivered from the domain of darkness. Again, left to ourselves, we are trapped and held captive with no escape. We are held captive in the domain of darkness. This is the devil's jurisdiction. These are the lies and the false promises and the counterfeit pleasures of this world. But in Christ, you are delivered. Jesus tells a brief parable in Matthew 12:29. He says this, or how can someone enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man? Then, indeed, he may plunder his house. Now, Jesus is not advocating breaking and entering, but He's giving a picture of what He has done. Jesus, the stronger man, has entered into enemy territory and kicked down the door and bound up Satan and taken back what is his. He has freed us, rescued us, delivered us from the domain of darkness. Satan, this world, our flesh, no longer have jurisdiction over us. We have been delivered. And this leads us to number 4. You are transferred into the kingdom of his beloved Son. In Christ, you are not just freed and then sent on your merry way. No, you are brought into the kingdom of Christ. You are taken into and then under the protection and provision of King Jesus, in whom, number 5, and finally, we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. We have been redeemed. We are redeemed. To redeem means to gain possession of something by way of purchase. Jesus purchased his people by his life and his death. I don't know about you, but I don't purchase things that I don't have a purpose for. And I don't think God does either. And so God has redeemed you, purchased you for a purpose. And so here, once again, we are finding how our identity in Christ has great effect on our purpose in life. Now, practically speaking, how can we take these truths and apply them to our lives? Well, it's good to remind yourself regularly, daily even, that in Christ you are qualified. In Christ, you share in the inheritance as an adopted child of God. In Christ, you have been delivered from the domain of darkness, the jurisdiction of the devil. In Christ, you have been transferred into the kingdom of Christ. And in Christ, you have been redeemed, purchased for a purpose. Remind yourself of that every day, and you'll find yourself resisting temptation more consistently, serving others more willingly, experiencing life more joyfully, and worshiping God more genuinely. If you have any questions about this topic or suggestions for others, please leave those in the comments. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. I'm Don Chapin. This is Word Wise Living. Thanks for watching.